Welcome back, everybody. It's time to talk about witchcraft again, and I've got my expert for that, which is Ola, the reading witch. And today we're going to talk about our experience of buddy reading Waking the Moon. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me once more on your channel. It's always great to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you had found time after the ordeal of reading that book to actually talk to me about it. So yeah, I've already put up like a general review ramble thing about it. So today I want to focus a bit more on our experience of buddy reading. Like this was like the first time I buddy read any book with anyone. So this was like, I had a great time, and I hope I didn't come across as too bumbling and whatnot in the conversations we had. But yeah, the buddy reading experience was awesome with you.
It was a great experience for me as well. I had never read anything like that book before. So regardless of having done buddy reads before, that was such a unique experience overall as a book, as a buddy read. And also, I think that you had a lot of knowledge in a lot of the things that were touched upon in that book. So for me, it was a great experience that taught me a lot of things. And also, one thing that I will say, and I super appreciate that about you always, is that you're very straightforward and you are not too much into the political correctness at all, which I love. And I think was perfect for that book because really that book was challenging a lot of opinions and thoughts that happen in life. So I guess that was fun time.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I had a lot of fun because yes, you're also like a very straightforward person when it comes to
Yeah.
talking about things. And yeah, that's, sometimes that's really a relief if you just like you talk first and then you remember like later that maybe some of the things you said weren't perfect, but you are willing to forgive the other person that
Yeah.
straightforwardness, and that helped a lot. Apart from that, we took way longer for it than I originally thought we would.
Yeah, it was surprising because after all, yes, it is a almost 500 pages long kind of book. So it's an average size book, let's say,
Mm,
more on the bigger than smaller, but it's not like a Malazan book. It it's not that big of a book. And still
true.
we took kind of a lot of time for it, but life got in between. And also I'm
Yeah.
not sure about the structure in a way.
Yeah.
I still have questions in my mind.
Yeah, Phil, that's something that I realized. Like when I started it, I wasn't expecting it to take that long. Yes, it's like, I mean, the audiobook is like 21 hours. The shortest Malazan book is 23 hours. So it's sort of
Yeah.
slightly smaller than Gardens of the Moon or The God Is Not Willing. But yeah, it's still like it's a hefty book, but not too large. And I don't know, I wasn't expecting it to be that challenging on an emotional level. And yes, oh, as you said, life got in the way for both of us because we are
Yeah.
very adult when it comes to getting our lives organized, I feel. But yeah, you said the structure was challenging for you. So maybe let's look a bit at the structure and what was so challenging there.
So something that you touched upon in your review, which by the way, you made a lot of points that I agree with, and then some. So I'm just going to start from there. So we are starting
Hmm?
from a middle ground on a
Yep.
lot of things. I know that you know because I talked to you already, but the people don't. So that's why I'm saying it.
Yeah.
And I think that it was a little bit confusing and jarring in the beginning when we had this web perspective and kind of narrator. And it was like, did I miss something here? And do I need to go back and go through this again and understand what's happening? And there was this change happening there. So that
Mhm.
was something that in the very beginning was a little bit confusing. But then I feel like even the pacing was going like very fast paced and very intense and a lot of craziness happening. And then there were moments that were slower and more descriptive, which
Mhm.
I was not mad at. I think she writes beautifully, especially descriptions, and she has a great attention to details that really make things true to
Mhm.
what they are. So I appreciate all of that. But you never knew what kind of part of book was coming. So it was
Yeah.
kind of harder in a way to decide, I really want to pick this up today. Also because life happening does not
Yeah.
really convey that feeling.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's like one of the things there. Like the pacing is weird. I mean, I already said like the switch between the first person narrator and the third person narrative was kind of like weird. This like first time it happened, I was just like, okay, that's weird because you start out with a first person narrative, and you figure it's like sort of Sweeney looking back at her life in college and everything, and then suddenly it switches. And then later on with the pacing as well, right? You have these moments where it's just this languid college life, people hanging around doing
Yeah.
nothing. And then when action happens, it escalates incredibly fast. Like that part,
Yes.
that long chapter in the first part, the Twilight at the Orphic Lodge with the weird ritual murder and everything is like that came unexpected in a way. It
Yes,
was like, okay.
exactly.
But then again, I thought about that and I realized like it kind of makes sense when you look at it in the way that this is like the 70s where everyone is like at college and everyone is taking drugs. And I don't know if you were at university, like the first couple of like semesters at university are like often like that. You have like your routine and it stretches like everything. And then suddenly things escalate on a personal level, usually not with like bulls that get sacrificed and stuff like that. I wasn't at that kind of, I wasn't at that kind of university. I studied mathematics and computer science. We were like way more sober
I
there.
did not do university, so I would not know.
Okay, but the point is like in that age, right, you have these moments that like stretch forever. And when things happen on an emotional level or anything, they happen super like abrupt in a way, and they suddenly happen, and suddenly you're 150% in that personal emotional whatever drama. And then after that everything just like stretches out again, and you're just there and waiting for the next thing to happen in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I did not do university, as I said, but I can remember that in high school when you had the
Mm.
moments where we had all the tests and you felt like a week passed in a day because you had so much to do. And I guess that's similar vibe, but it was also so much reflected in the crazy stuff. So,
Yeah.
and what was crazy was super crazy. So,
Yeah, true. Yeah, I mean that's like the other part of it, but I feel like like the first part of the novel with the college life, the way it describes college life is really, really it captures that mood of like when you start at university and you're still figuring out if you actually want to do that, and you're trying to figure out how much work you actually need to put in and how much time you can spend in bars and whatnot. And like I've been there, I've done that, and yeah, it felt very, very, very real. Like, I mean,
yeah,
I didn't go to college in the 70s, so I missed all the weird clubs and all the drugs, but we still have that trying to figure out that point of like being on your own for the first time in a way,
yeah,
and trying to get all that stuff sorted out, and then all the supernatural shit happening as well was an interesting way to put that. And as you said, the amount of detail in descriptions, like when the amount of like attention she pays to the different fabrics of the clothes and everything, like if you've seen 70s late 70s clothes, yes, it's important
yeah.
to pay attention to that.
Yeah, I have a couple of them because they were my aunts, and
Mhm.
I actually have some of her 70s clothes that I actually sometimes wear, so I know.
I just listen to that kind of music, right? When he talks about the guitar of the guy from 13th Floor Elevators, which is Roky Erickson, who was with the 13th Floor Elevators, one of those huge influences into like the whole idea of occult rock, like with like mixing occult themes with rock music and kind of transcending that thing between ritual and music in a way in the
Mhm.
70s. And so those are mentioned for specific reasons in a way, and that's something that I found also very interesting, how she does
Yeah.
that.
And she did the same kind of thing even when describing the architecture and the art.
Mm, yeah.
And it was all very Italian inspired. And people might not know, but I am Italian. And I'll tell you straight like that. Italian stuff is often so butchered in foreign literature unless it's more researched, and this was very well researched. Even when they were using Italian language, it
Mhm.
was always minus just one tiny mini mistake. Perfect. And I was so impressed because it never happened before to me unless it was like a very high kind of classic stuff or stuff like that. So I really, really appreciate it. And I saw a lot of details that were portrayed that I could get back to churches or architectures that I
Mhm.
saw all my whole life. And that was absolutely great to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's like the other thing when she describes the angels on the dormitory and all that, the architecture stuff. Like what she manages to do is to show that even like Baroque architecture, or like in this case,
Yeah.
obviously like imitation Baroque, but still, and church architecture can appear really like foreboding and creepy if you want.
Yes.
Like,
But part of that was actually the purpose, especially in Gothic
yeah, of
architecture.
course.
The goal was to make the man, the human, feel small and intimidated. And yeah,
Yeah.
then we can go about all the possible art periods
Mhm.
of time.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
it was there, that feeling of wanting you
Mhm.
to feel tiny
And
and insignificant was there.
that's like one of my like favorite churches, like when it comes to like really like creepy threatening churches, is actually in Bologna. And there's like this one church that has these statues of like monks out of black marble outside, and
Oh,
you can't see their
yeah,
faces and you can't see their hands. It's just like the robes and everything, and
yes,
that's so creepy. It's still
yeah,
it's a beautiful church, but it's still
yeah,
creepy.
that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I was thinking specifically of when we were studying history of art and we went and saw two different Gothic inspired churches, but one
Mhm.
was Byzantine Gothic and the other one was more European Gothic in Venice, always because I'm from Venice. And truly, one of them is more about the the decorations and the play with the light and all of that. So
Mhm.
plays with art and architecture in a way. The one that was more European inspired was tall and very dark and very kind of gloomy feeling when you get inside, even if it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, different feelings.
Definitely. Um, and like another thing that like is important, like it's always made clear, and this is like a theme that we need to talk about later on as well, like the gender theme that is like underlying it, like the idea of like transgender or gender
Yeah.
fluidity, more like gender fluidity. That's something that is like inherent in the idea of an angel, right? Like,
Yeah, there's an all talk about the sex of angels because angels do not have a sex or a gender because they
mm,
should be genderless, sexless, perfect beings that you can't fetishize in a way, I
yeah,
suppose. But it does not really work that well, I guess.
it's like, I mean, that's like an interesting thing. I was like at a lecture once for archaeology where we looked at Byzantine, like the transformation of angels, because the idea of like how angels look, like the classic image of an angel that we have nowadays with like
Mhm.
wings and everything. And you can trace that from like classical Greek art over, and it's usually those depictions of that winged being and so forth were depictions of Nike, the goddess of victory, and those were slowly moved, like changed into depictions of angels. So the original is actually a female depiction because it's a goddess, and then you turn it into like archangels that are, well, as I said, like there's like no actual like gender or anything behind it, but we assume like from the names like Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and so forth, we assume them to be male. So the idea of gender fluidity is inherent in the idea of angels when you look at it at an art historical way of how they
Absolutely.
how we see them nowadays.
Yeah, and also always I'm thinking about paintings. There are a lot of type of angels that are like codified and all of that. And many of them, when they need to be very, very generic, are represented as kids or children or toddlers. And so it
Mhm.
gets even more muddy in a way. And
Yeah,
I don't know. So,
yeah.
but I, yeah, that was a point. that was absolutely there. And also there was somewhat a fluidity in sexuality, which, I mean, it's not surprising since we're talking about the 70s, but um, it was all there.
I mean, that's like the other thing that I so appreciated about it, is like these themes are like topics of gender fluidity or something that are back in like our common discourse nowadays, at least
Yes.
on the online side of it. The offline side is still like lagging behind, but it's back. But the novel is from 1995, and while you have all that stuff, you have your Ziggy Stardust and all that like gender fluidity in the 70s, but to transport it and like look at how these themes like dwelt in the underground and like still bubbled along, were never just a fad of the 70s, but always there, is something that the novel did for me in a way that I wasn't like, consciously thinking about, because it's not exactly something I usually think about. But it's like, yeah, of course it makes sense. David Bowie didn't die in the 70s. He died like 5 years ago. And other like these themes have always been there for the people that are
Part of
um
it
exactly
that identify.
that are part of it. They just like weren't like in the mainstream focus of attention as much as they were in the 70s during the 80s and 90s, because
Yeah.
while we still had like very questionable outfit choices, there was like this weird, when you look at like glam rock and stuff in the 80s, this weird marriage of androgynous looks and hyper masculinity that you have there, but
Yeah.
it left the fluidity kind of got lost there. I appreciated the fact that it was like a subtle theme that like went through the entire novel.
Absolutely. And that's what I was about to say. I really, really appreciated how kind of effortless and just there. It was
Mhm.
simply just there as something. Now, about the gender fluidity, we can say maybe much more. There was a little more than just there towards the end. But at least about the sexuality part, it was very just easygoing to me. And
Yeah.
I identify as bisexual, so I've known that since I was 6 years old, and I was interested in both sides of my class, and my classmates were weirded out. So that was the story. And I was in elementary school in the 90s, and it was not so free and well accepted. And so I really kind of appreciated how not mm,
Mhm.
well, she did not try to make a huge deal about the representation that she was involving in the book. And
No.
sometimes when authors try to make a huge deal of, hey, I have diverse characters, it really sounds like you're trying too hard. And it was not the case at all in this one, which I appreciate a lot.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. Another thing that I found fascinating, you can probably say a lot on, on that more than me because I'm not from there, is like the the small glimpse we got of like Angelica's Italian side of the family. You see that
Mm-hmm.
like more like conservative part, like they're obviously like high class, like
Yes.
really rich and so forth. So you see the part where it is like upper class has way more liberties in a way than like the lower classes have. But on the other hand, you still, when you have these like flashbacks when she's talking to her uncle or whoever that is about her mother and gets that information from there, you still get that feeling that Italy is much more conservative than like 70s America.
Yeah, definitely. And something that really hit me was a moment towards the third part where they were talking about women starting to have jobs and careers on their own, but it's not normal yet in Italy. And I mean, that's kind of true. I mean, it is today. I'm not saying that it's not today, but the level of use that people have towards this kind of more less conservative takes on
Mm,
life and women and people are definitely less commonly accepted and commonly
yeah.
understood. And maybe they are on the surface because, I mean, it would be called the misogynistic piece of shit if you probably would tell that a woman that just needs to be in the kitchen. But you know that some people don't say that, but they think that, and you can tell very clearly, and they don't need to say it. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
still more accepted than not to think that internally here. I feel sometimes. And there's also still a lot of how can I say that? Well, not being Christian or just an atheist and just believing in anything else, anything in between, even some witchy stuff, as I call them, like myself, it's so frowned upon, and people
Yeah.
really have issues with all of that. And you just pull out a tarot deck, and some jump 3 meters behind you because they're scared. And there's all the things to consider.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, yeah, what I find interesting about it is how she manages to just weave these details in without making it like a, let's talk about how backwards, how conservative Italy is in the I mean,
Yeah.
this is like 1995, so this is like 25 years ago.
Yes.
I personally did not think about gender equality in 1995.
Well, I did not even know that gender equality existed when I was 3 years old, because I was 3 years old in 95. So
Well, I didn't. I may have heard the word at that point. I'm not quite sure. I was 11 at the time, so
yeah.
still, it's not exactly when you think about that. I was still on
Yeah,
the I want to be. I was still in the I want to be an astronaut stage of my life.
That's awesome. But something else that I wanted to add regarding the occult kind of stuff in Italy is that most people, especially wealthy one, act all scared and disgusted by all the occult-ish thing. But then there are so many scandals here of people that actually go to psychics and tarot readers, or get their palm read and stuff like that, or get some weird ritual happening, even if they are like super active in the church and they are condemning anyone else. There's a lot of hypocrisy in the higher classes in Italy that act very conservative. And I thought that in a way it was represented there, because we have these Benandanti families that are acting all conservative and proper, but they are involved in a lot of shit. So there was a side of it all.
I mean, that was like, actually, I mean, I get your point. Like, I was just a bit disappointed that you just slapped the name Benandante on it and just didn't do anything about like the really fun part of like what we know about Benandante. But you know, it's still, the Benandante played a very small role in the entire book compared to like because they're mentioned on the back cover, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's cool. And then I was like, oh, they're just like a secret society. We never learned anything about it.
I must say that I was expecting when we got to Italy, to Angelica's
Yeah.
family, that we were going to learn about the backstory of her family and the Benandanti and all of that, but we did not get it. We got much more about the moon goddess or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was a little bit sad about that as well, also because I do not know too much about the Benandanti and I was curious to learn more. There were some nods, and the ones that appeared were not wrong. So
No.
I mean, we got something there. So
No, they were not wrong. It was just like with something as idiosyncratic and as unique as the Benandante, you could have done more with it.
I guess that it was mostly used to show a more male-dominated counterpart to the moon goddess part that was all the female aspect.
That makes a lot of sense, because on the other hand, the Benandante are kind of, from what I know, which is only the book that I read, but that's kind of the definitive work on the Benandante. So
yeah,
they are not 100% male, but they are like unique in a way that they are a kind of pagan order that is kind of connected to witchcraft and does the same things that witches are supposed to do in, you know, the 16th and 17th century, that allow men inside. So it's because they are before or outside that usual, like witches are mostly women, and they're beyond that. So that makes a lot of sense. Yes.
Yeah, that's how I saw it personally. And it's also very weird and fascinating to me that Benandanti were kind of, in a way, still connecting with the religion itself. They were not like going against
No.
And that was part of the thing. It was absolutely weird because then the church turned on them. And I thought it was very interesting and I kind of wanted to see more. But also, there's something else to say about witchcraft and being always connected with women. And I think that's where the book did go actually, with the comparison with Benandanti and Moon Goddess, White Goddess, however we want to call it. And there was this like, yes, we can all do the same things, but there's always some kind of disparity because it's kind of embedded in our society in a way to have its disparity, at least in a way. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but I hope that you can pick it up and make it better.
We'll see. Like, I mean, so if we're going to go more into like the moon goddess worship stuff, like the thing that I find interesting there, and that like when I first started into it, like was like because especially that like Twilight at the Orphic Lodge chapter when they go like full on bull sacrifice. It kind of caught me by surprise because I wasn't expecting it to go that explicitly violent and everything. And then I thought about like the point is of a lot of like both of the fear that came out of it, and on the other hand, the mystique that is in there on the other side is like that it is very much connected to these like to on the one hand like sexuality obviously, but on the other hand also to like the regenerative like cycle of nature, that whole like death and rebirth and so forth. It is very much about blood, and you mix obviously you have that connection of like the moon with like the female period and stuff like that, but and we tend to do what we tend to do in literature because we don't want to like a lot of like more like fantasy because it's a conservative genre in a lot of ways and written for men who are way more squeamish than they let on. We rarely go into the bloody details of all of that, and what Elizabeth Hand does here with her depiction of the magic when it happens, is like she doesn't shrink back from that. She just like, yeah, there is blood sacrifice, and it is very explicit in that regard. So once I actually sat down and thought about it, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. You don't want it all just to be like mystical dancing in the moonlight. that's like the Disney version of it. No, that dance in the moonlight ends with blood and sacrifice.
But that was the power, I think, of the way that she wrote that story, because she showed like even good ideas that when brought to extremes, they get completely ruined, and you can never do something good when you got to the too much route of things. And even if you start from a good point, like, yeah, sure, men and women should have equal rights and all that same stuff that we all can blabber for many years, but if you go to the extreme route, like the crazy stuff that then are pushed on some characters or by some characters, you can see how everything can be ruined, basically.
I mean, there's like two ways to go from this. Like the one side is this is on like a lot of levels also a story about or the conflict of civilization, where you like what civilization does is it kind of acts as a dampener in a way on like more primal or like urges and stuff. So you can't in Western society, in Western civilization, you can't just go around sacrificing bulls anymore. That's no longer possible. God, I hope this rain will not get like super hard, because then I have to figure something out. Anyway, the other side, however, is, and this is like the part of like where like revolution and rebellion and stuff comes from. It's like if like oppression is hard enough, and if, for example, like gender inequality is hard enough, depending on how conservative your country is, sometimes peaceful protests are no longer the solution to take, or are no longer what will actually get you like where you want. So like the harder the oppression, the more seductive, or maybe the only actual valid option is violence in a way. So that's sort of like, I guess, the point that we see at the end of, like, in part 3 there with Angelica's movement, because the people who are on her side are unfortunately mostly, because we only see like the rich American people that are like, you already have more or less gender equality and stuff. So you're basically, you sacrificing people and all of that is a bit like over the top, but people in places where like gender inequality is much rougher and women are much more subjugated and oppressed, I can totally see them taking up weapons and fighting, because that's maybe the only way to actually get anything done at that point.
Yeah, I was talking more on a theoretical way. What I was trying to say is that ideas can be dangerous, basically. And even a great idea that starts from a great point of view with great ideals and a great purpose at the end, if it's taken to an extreme, can, regardless of violence, can become extremely dangerous and ugly. And I think that was part of the things represented.
I feel that's like, on the other hand, like the interesting thing that we see, especially on in like the third part, and when we have the meetings of Annie Harmon, who's definitely my favorite character in the entire book, and with those young oh shit, this is getting too wet. I need to figure something out. So where were we? Yes. The whole idea of violence in there. The interesting thing that I wanted to say is that exactly, it's like the people that are into like violent action sacrifice are people that are already on like, well, not you know, gender equality, but are like all privileged people, right? Her like, I mean, because she's running this as something of like a lifestyle thing, or like self-help teaching kind of thing. And there's like, oh, even mentioned that like her like retreats and courses cost like thousands of dollars. So it's sort of a lifestyle feminism in a way that she's like doing there in a way.
Yes, but again, I feel like a lot of people can benefit from like some basic feminism additional in their lives. And that would be great if we had some more support for some people, because no matter of your privilege or not, some cultures do not really teach you that, and you have to learn it yourself, especially coming from a female point of view here. I just
you're the one to talk.
I just had to let. No, what I'm trying to say is that some things are known even in privileged societies like ours, and they are technically a common thing that we can agree on. But how many people actually act upon that? I was saying, I left a workplace recently because of the incessant misogyny that I was facing on the daily. And I mean, yes, Italy can be considered more closed up in some way, and all we already talked about, but some things should not happen, you know, and that does not justify violence at all, but you need to learn that you have the right to ask for respect in a way. And see, if your way to teach that to other women that maybe are more insecure or did not have a chance to have anyone that teach you that, and you want to use whatever moon goddess or whatever dancing in the moonlight you would like, go ahead and do that, whatever works for you. But the problem is that when you get to the extreme place and you decide that everything that is not going with what you believe is evil, and you have to kill everyone else, like that's where I was going with the, when things get to the extreme, even if they started out of something potentially positive, they become terrible. I guess that's,
I know what you mean. All right, but we need to talk about, apart from the witchcraft, the romance. What did you think about the
overall love story of Sweeney and Oliver, and then later,
Yeah.
yeah.
I feel that was weirdly uncomfortable because it was kind of weird. You know what I'm trying to say there? And it was all very quick and with this big age gap and all the things. So being also quick with the situation that was there, with this being the person that he was, with the connection that he had, it all felt a little bit, okay, this is a lot to handle, and this is very quick, and this, you two are just, okay, you do you, happy for you, but I don't know how to explain that differently. And
I mean, she would totally get canceled for this behavior today. I can tell you that.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. But most characters in this book would be canceled for whatever they did in the book today. So is there really a point?
No, but like, I mean, so here's the thing that I found fascinating about it. It's like, on the one hand, it's very much because the way she writes it is very much a mundane story. Like, Sweeney's a very mundane character, especially in part
Yes.
3, right? And she's kind of approaching her midlife crisis almost, and then the guy shows up, and what's his name? Well, Angelica's
Dylan?
son. What?
Was it Dylan?
Dylan, yeah. Dylan, that's the point, yeah. And I was for a moment like confused. Anyway, Dylan shows up and they fall in love immediately, and it goes from there. And the interesting thing is that with the whole like framing of the overall story and him being
Yes.
Oliver's son and everything, it becomes this, it acquires this overarching like magical romance level
Exactly.
that the rest of the story totally is not, because they're still like, you know, getting drunk in bars and everything.
Yeah, and for me, that's why I was not complaining about the kind of insta love aspect, because it made sense in the context and with the weird magic and prophecy happening around it. But at the first glance, in the first moment, you were like, what the fuck? So quick?
Well, on the other hand, you know, it is one of the few, like, it is a novel where it is actually an older woman falling in love with a younger man and not the other way around, like a lot of the
Yeah.
other stuff is, which once again kind of, you know, overthrows these ideas of like, this is in the end, like it's marketed as urban fantasy, which obviously has changed since 1995, I would say a lot.
Yeah.
And the interesting part in this book is that like all the female characters are extremely strong and powerful, and all the male characters and the supernatural elements of it are kind of at the behest of the strong women in that story, which very much goes against what you might see as like current urban fantasy trends, where you have your average like a college kid falls in love with a vampire kind of story.
I was not much into those books ever. So I'm not the right person to have that kind of chat, I fear. I was forced to go and watch the first Twilight movie by my classmates, who bought a ticket for me because I was refusing to even touch that story, no matter if it was a book or a movie, because I was not interested. So
I saw
yeah.
it by accident because I went to like a sneak preview and it was this movie and I didn't know in advance.
Yeah. Well, so again, when we were talking about the women empowerment and the feminism in this book, I think it's done in many different ways. So you can see that both with the characters and the Benandanti versus White Goddess, and you can see that in the relationship that for once it is an older woman with a younger guy. There are so many aspects of it all that play into that, and I feel that's all showing sides that are both good and bad of the idea of women empowerment, which on a basis level, I think and maybe I'm biased, of course I am because I'm a woman, that is a good thing to push, because I do believe that it is, not because women should have more power than men, but because they tend to start with less to begin with, if that makes sense in society.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I was going. But what I appreciated about Elizabeth Hand is that she shows a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the fun, and the just weird. And it was something that she did constantly and consistently with a lot of themes and aspects, and even plot points and characters. So
I feel like the sheer humanity of her characters is something that I found impressive, because it's like her characters don't behave like characters in books. They behave like people I know. And that's oftentimes scary. A lot of people I know behave like idiots, including me, but it's still like, it feels very realistic. I read that book and I'm like, okay, I've met a lot of these kind of people. They exist. This is not made up.
They exist.
And but in the ways, like, I mean, especially with like modern fantasy and urban fantasy and stuff like that, you have a lot of like your average like wish fulfillment characters, your Mary Susan and whatnot. It's like that, you know, the reader or the author wishes to be, I don't know, that girl falling in love with a vampire or whatever.
Yeah.
And I get that, and that's not a problem. But with her characters, it's like, you don't really want to be those kind of
no.
people. You don't want to be Sweeney, you don't want to be Angelica, and you certainly don't want to be Oliver. But it's like very much like, it's still like people that exist out there, because unfortunately life in general is messy.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say with the good, the bad, the ugly, the fun, the weird, and all of that she was showing about everything in a very raw way. She was very raw in her writing, and and if you want to go and talk about this kind of topics, and you want to get dirty with the rituals and all of that, you have to be raw. Otherwise, it's going to just sound Twilighty, as we were saying.
Yeah, I think that's I feel like the main thing that makes this book, I wouldn't say unique, but at least like stand out in general for me, was exactly how raw and direct she is with a lot of things, especially when it comes to the magic. She doesn't shy back from any of like the dark sides of these things.
Absolutely.
Which
and
is
something
interesting.
else that really stood out. Sorry, go ahead.
Which is interesting because, like, you know, when you look at like how the New Age stuff, the New Age, you have that weird mix of New Age and feminism in like the 80s and early 90s. There's like a lot of that going on. And a lot of that is like, because it's meant to be sold to people. New Age became like a commodity to be sold to people, a commercial thing. It plastered over a lot of the darker aspects of it. And you're talking about the mysterious power of the woman. It's like, yeah, that's mostly like blood. And I'm not saying you should like start sacrificing bulls. I'm just saying it's weird to call it like mysterious femininity when it's.
Well, from my point of view, I guess I see that in a more, how can I say that, metaphorical way, if we will. Like, as I was talking before, witches were just any kind of woman that was uncomfortable in society back then. So I understand the connection with this New Age occult things and feminism, because it's kind of a way to say, okay, so we're all witches. What's that? And I get it. Once more, as you were saying, there is the capitalistic mindset behind it, that it's one of the aspects that ruins it all, because once you try to put something and make it become mainstream and be able to sell it to many people and make money out of it, you are cheapening it.
Yeah, and that's what Angelica is doing, right? She's writing books and
exactly. And again, it's okay to put out there positive ideas and maybe equality and all the good stuff. But if you want to make money out of it, where is your mind and heart in all of that, I guess, you know?
the main idea is that behind like a commercial, like positive face or whatever you want to call it, there can always hide that darkness.
Yeah, but that's about everything, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. It's not exclusive to to new age witches. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I guess, see, the thing is, sometimes I feel like it's so easy to attach to women and witches and new age and magic bad sides just because we are so used to that.
Yeah.
And we can say the same thing about, again, as we were talking about Twilight, it's so easy to make a centuries old young looking guy that's actually a vampire fall in love with being a predator to a teenage girl and sell it. It's very dark if you think about that way. It's not nice having someone that gets into your room and look at you while you sleep. And they were selling that shit to teenagers. So
Yeah.
I think that the point is also taking away some misconceptions around some groups of people. But then again, the point of taking away misconceptions around women and witches and new age and all of that, it can't go too far because you can't forget about the ugly stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
otherwise, we are going to be like in the opposite way. And, you know, that I guess I'm trying to make the point that Angelica goes too far, way too fucking far.
Yeah.
And
of course.
yeah, I guess we can agree on that. And the part is finding some kind of balance among all the things, but I'm not sure if I made much sense.
No, I think it's fine. Like one final thing that I find it interesting to talk about is the idea of the magical versus the mundane in the book. Because what we have there is with Sweeney being someone who kind of discovers this like magical world, and then she gets thrown back into the mundane with her job in part 2 and 3. And she gets another chance at getting into like the romance and everything. And the idea that as we grow older, we tend to realize that a lot of like our lives are very, very mundane and boring. And we tend to wish that maybe things are different or had been different. We would have actually done the great things that we set out dreaming when we were teenagers. And I just found the way she describes that part of like growing older and becoming more and more disillusioned and then grasping for that chance of re-enchantment in a way. That's something I feel is very strong.
Yeah, I know what you mean there. I have not gone through that yet, so I can't speak yet from experience.
Just wait till you reach my age.
Dun dun dun. That sounds like threatening things.
No, don't worry.
No, but I totally even if I have not been through that, I've been through my fair amount of shit in my life. So I totally understand I need something that is more whimsical in my life right now because I have to kind of get distracted from something. I am tired of all of this. So in that kind of aspect of things, I get it. But I could relate a lot to the feeling of being stagnant in this kind of job that she was not caring much about, that she thought it was different. And that kind of disillusion, yes, that sucks.
Yeah, of course it sucks. No, but I felt that she just made like a very good case for why people seek that more than just going through the motions of life. And that's something that we all share as like definitely as teenagers and as like people growing up. We have all these dreams, and it's important to hold on to them or recapture them and not just fall into that like routine of just surviving in a way, I guess.
I feel like I am too much of a mess to be able to relate. I have had a weird life. I have to grown up very quickly in my life, so
Yeah.
yeah, I fear that I have not followed the normal steps, I guess.
All right. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I can relate is what I'm trying to say. Anyway.
That's great.
Yeah. Apart from that, what else did you really like or really dislike about the book?
I don't feel like I really disliked anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
I did not have big problems with anything that
Mm-hmm.
I can think of in a book,
Mm-hmm.
besides of a general vibe of I am struggling to get through this one as quickly as I thought I would
Yeah.
for and that we touched upon already.
Mm-hmm.
Again, towards the end, when we got all the pieces connecting, even parts that I was not caring about and I was maybe questioning, they started making more sense of
Yeah.
why they were reading like that into the story. So I
Mm-hmm.
appreciated that a lot personally because I think that she did not leave things to just chaos and not explain things that she wanted to explain that she had thrown out there, and she tied her ends nicely, but not in a way that is too overly explained that could be
Yeah.
off-putting when we're talking about magical stuff. Like, you don't want everything to be too explained, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I think there was a good balance of this, so that I appreciated a lot. um
I don't know, like for
what
me, it
else?
was like I started like when so I'd read one other book of hers before, that is Wilding Hall, which I
Mhm.
absolutely love. Um, but I wasn't expecting it to go in that many directions all at once when I started it. I think
Yeah.
that's sort of like I was not expecting it to touch on that many subjects. I was like, okay, this is gonna be like 70s and witchcraft, and then suddenly it's also 90s and feminism and all kinds of other stuff, and I'm like, okay, that was more than I bargained for, and I was pleasantly
Yeah,
surprised, but it was very much more of a like challenging read than I was expecting out from like the outset.
definitely. And also, I'm not saying that this is bad because the book was good, but sometimes when you have some kind of expectation going into a book
Mm,
and they are what you find is different, you're thrown off, and it can mess with you a little bit. And I
yeah,
as well was expecting a whole book about um university, whatever, and teenagers dealing with magic stuff and
yeah,
witchcraft. I was expecting, like you, way more about the Verandanti, and we got very little about that. Somehow, the synopsis can be said it's a little bit misleading, but in other
yeah.
way, it is not, because we have that. And I wonder if the synopsis was more complete, maybe it would have been too complete.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's like kind of the question, but I was like, in the end, I got like way more than I bargained for, and
Yeah.
I'm glad I got all of that because it made it a way more fascinating and way more interesting book, and one that I certainly like will be thinking about a lot. It's like not something that I can just like put aside, like, yeah, that was an interesting story, and then I'll just go on to read the next thing. It's like, no, this is something
Mhm.
that will stay with me for a while, where I think about all kinds of different aspects in it.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe just add more of the Benandanti if you really want to put the name on the cover.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Well, I've read my Benedante book, so I'm good, but still.
Yeah, just talking from a marketing standpoint
Yeah.
of the book, because I guess maybe you have some fanatic that just is so into that,
Yeah.
and there you get the 1-star review because you did not talk about them enough.
Yeah. Maybe.
Not me, but you never know with the internet.
That's true. Well, I don't know. I didn't check like reviews for the book that much because I never do. So I don't know how people like that book. I just like feels like it's one of those books that like no one knows about or talks about. It's not exactly like a well-known famous
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. And I also think that is a book that is going to resonate and make people react in very different ways, because
Yeah.
it's not very straightforward. Even if the plot itself, we know where it goes and it's pretty understandable what the story actually is, it's not a book that you read about the plot, in my opinion, because
No.
all the discussions that are built around the plot are really the reasons what makes the book, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. Although, I mean, even the plot is like, once you come to like part 3, the plot gets kind of like understandable. But before part 3, you're like, I have no idea where this will be going.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going when I said that she tied her ends nicely, but not too much, because you had all these things thrown around in the beginning with the prophecy and Angelica and Oliver and this, and then poof, part 2, messy, weird, time skipping parts.
Yeah,
and
true.
confusion. And then part 3, we are 20, 30, whatever, 30, 20 years later.
Yeah, something like 20 years. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was like a very, very fascinating book. And I mean that like in the most positive way imaginable. It was just like an odd book in a way, like just not your streamlined, average, like following conventions kind of book.
Yeah, there was nothing average or streamlined or not out of the box with that one. It was very unique.
Yeah.
And also thought-provoking. And to me, when a book makes me think, even if I hated it, it's kind of valuable.
Yeah. Not that I hated the book, but yeah, it
No,
definitely,
absolutely.
it definitely made me think a lot.
That was a weird way to kind of say, read the book.
Yeah. Well, it also made me go back and listen to MC5 and Rocky Erickson. So there's that as a bonus.
Yeah, see.
But I mean, that's, I feel like, was like, apart from like all the other things, the thing that like really kept me, even with like the long descriptive parts, like always like to the book, was just like her incredible sense of place and time, whether it's the 70s or the 90s. It's just so good at just like making you feel how it would be to be in that place.
Yes, and I think that she had the right amount of details and the right choice of details,
Yeah.
like those little things that would eat you. And yeah, I don't know how to explain different. It was just right.
Yeah. Yeah. It felt like she was there in a way, and like maybe has a a lingering love for proto-punk music. But I might be biased because I also read her like Wilding Hall, which is about the 70s folk scene in England. So she might
definitely
have like,
she has an interest in that, since she talks about the 70s a lot. I mean,
yeah, well, which is fine. I don't
absolutely.
mind.
I have that other book on my want to read list of books, because eventually I would like to pick it up.
It's also like very short. That helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel we've kind of like gone through all the major things, and unless there's something you want to add.
Don't think so. I think, yeah, I think that was already a lot.
All right, then once again, thank you for talking to me about this. Thank you for buddy reading it with me. It was a great experience. I had a lot of fun.